Well, we'll certainly give Craig time to come back and then another couple of minutes for people who'd like to join and aren't here yet. Thank you, John.
Oh,
Craig's back. You can unmute him again. Thank you.
good evening, and my apologies. My camera doesn't seem to be working, so I think I need to just restart my computer. So I'm going to come back again, but it should be quick. It should only be a minute. This
You
is
know
a
what? We're waiting a couple minutes anyway, Craig, for people who'd like
okay.
to join, so it's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So for everyone who's already joined, I'm Alita Camp. I'm co-chair of this committee along with Craig Later, who you've just heard, who's going off to hopefully fix his camera on his computer. But we're giving it another few minutes to allow people to join who are not yet here. So thank you for your patience. Well, Craig's the data expert, so we need to wait for him to get started anyway. But in another minute or two, John, you could just go ahead with your introduction to process. Thank you. Oh, Craig is back. Um, so why don't you do your run through, John, and then, but Craig's camera is still off. And you can unmute Craig.
Yeah, I don't know why my camera's not working. I just tried restarting my computer and, oh wait, no.
Yeah,
Something is not working, so it's not, the
that's
video
okay.
seems to be failing me. I'll
That's
work on it in the meantime.
okay. So I think we should just start with Jonathan right now and then go on with your data update, Craig, and then proceed as the agenda dictates.
Sure.
John, thank you.
So, welcome all. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you're all currently muted, and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting, except for the co-chairs, any people speaking during the agenda. Following the presentation, as we move through the agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the react icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up button, as those will disappear. Only press the raise hand button once. If you press it a second time, it will go back down. If you are calling on your phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. Be on lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is available for technical support only to help software problems, not to ask for questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chat. If you are using an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the Persons section, where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen, because we may not actually see you. Chat for me for any technical support.
Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you everyone for being here. This is the April meeting of the Community Board 8 Congestion Pricing Task Force. Craig Later and I, Alita Camp, are the co-chairs, as I mentioned earlier. And so I'm going to turn it over to Craig, who, as I mentioned as well, is the data expert here. Craig, take it
All
away.
right. Good evening, everyone. And again, my apologies. My camera seems to have failed me since I was co-chairing last night's transportation committee meeting. But hopefully I will be able to correct it. But if not, then you'll just have to deal without seeing my pretty face, and I know we could all live without that.
Oh,
Anyway,
don't do that. That's not nice.
so let me, as Alita said, well, first, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And as Alita said, let me just take everyone on a little walkthrough of where we stand right now. So I'll just give a little data update, and I will provide just a little bit of initial information as far as oh, I would, Jonathan, do you mind allowing me to share my screen, please? Thank you,
It
John.
should allow you now. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. All right, let me just get to, I need to open it. I'm sorry, because I just reopened my computer. Um,
You could put your picture up there when you don't have any data, Craig.
I know, I just haven't set that up yet. Um, I know, and I was also, as I'm loading up um the PDF file, the PowerPoint, I apologize that I admittedly am not as fully prepared as I have been in the past. It probably didn't help that last night I had a meeting that went to almost 10 o'clock. So just bear with me in case you see any typos or in case there's anything that's not clear. Um, I will try to make sense of everything. Okay, we're almost there, just hopefully 10 seconds or so.
It was a long
Okay,
meeting with a lot of serious agenda items, so you and Chuck did a good job.
thank you. It was a long meeting and it was an interesting meeting. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Actually, you know what? Just bear with me for one more minute. I'm going to stop sharing because I want to make sure it's actually coming from the right source because it's going to be cut off in it's like this. Um, why can't I open this as a PDF? Okay. Usually I'm more prepared, as I said.
No worries, Craig. It's okay.
There we go. Okay. I think I'm really ready to share.
I would say though, while Craig's still setting up, that everyone, of course, is welcome to have your cameras off while Craig and I are doing any kind of presentation. But if you'd like to, and while you're not speaking, but if you'd like to speak and raise your hand, I'd just ask if you wouldn't mind turning on your camera. There's no requirement, but it's just a little more personal when you're able to do that. So thank you.
Okay, here we go. So just let me start with a brief status update as to where we are, and really just an overview of the big ticket items since we last met. I believe it was like January 22nd. So, as I'm sure most everyone knows, there has been a lot of back and forth between the federal government and New York State as far as the status of congestion pricing. And just to be clear as to where we are right now. So on February 19th, the US DOT Secretary, Sean Duffy, sent a letter to Kathy Hochul in which he announced that congestion pricing, its approval that was provided back in November under the Value Pricing Pilot Program, or the VPPP as they call it, was rescinded. And this is the federal program in which congestion pricing was allowed to operate. It is essentially a program that allows for tolling to be permissible on certain roadways that are under the federal highway system. And because of the fact that there are certain roadways in the congestion zone that do classify as part of that federal system, and I don't know for a fact, but it may very well be 34th Street, because if you ever saw an old road map, it was identified as Interstate 495, even though we know it is 34th Street. And then the Lincoln Tunnel is also signed as 495. So the fact that I think that may very well be what the controversy was, and there may be other cases as well. So because that was really what enabled congestion pricing to be permissible, and they pulled the approval, they were then saying that congestion pricing needed to needed to come to an end, and they called for a quote orderly cessation, and that they would work with New York State DOT to do so. The next day, a letter was sent from U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Duffy to multiple New York officials, including the New York State DOT Commissioner and I believe the MTA chair. I thought there was someone else as well, and that stated again that as of March 21st, the VPPP would not be effective. I should say that. So this is just a typo in this, that it would be rescinded as of that date, and that is the date that the cessation of tolls was supposed to have occurred. The response was immediate from the governor and the MTA chair, Janno Lieber, and they simply said tolls will remain on, and they suggested that until there is a federal injunction, or an injunction by a court stating that they have to shut the cameras, they are going to remain on. And their belief was that there was no legal basis for being able to rescind an approval that had already occurred. And then there was more wrangling, and you probably may have heard in the news about meetings between the governor and the president about congestion pricing and other topics. And there's all these political stories about how the congestion pricing issue is probably linked in many ways to some of the other non-transportation policies affecting the states. And it led to social media posting from Secretary Duffy on March 20th, saying that the federal government was going to be providing a 30-day extension of the directive to stop congestion pricing from tolling from occurring any further. So that's where we are right now. We are within that second 30-day extension. As of today, as everyone knows, congestion pricing continues to operate, and we don't know how this is going to play out. And we don't know if there's going to be a deal, or if the federal government's going to attempt to try to um, do anything in regards to funding in other respects in relation to the state or the city. So we'll see how this plays out. But as of now, it's continuing to operate. So just a little bit of an overview of initial results. And I just want to start by making this little statement and disclaimer. So we're 3 months into congestion pricing. And what I tried to do here was to try to take um, data that actually existed or reports from entities that have reported data and try to keep this as quantitative as possible. And we will have a chance to get into the qualitative pieces later on, I promise. But I just want to try to give that overview, but also make it clear that 3 months into it does not necessarily allow us to know whether any of the changes that we have seen over the past 3 months are sustainable or aren't going to continue to further evolve. Because realistically, no one expected 2 to 3 months of data to really be able to um, come to any conclusions about anything. That being said, there are clearly some trends that have occurred over the first few months, and it will be interesting to see if they continue and how they change. And again, as you may suspect, travel patterns and such are different in the first few months of the year. There seems to be over the course of the year an increasing amount of traffic activity that occurs. So it will be interesting as we get into the summer months and then into the holiday season to see what happens. But you can definitely see some trends emerging, and I do want to make sure that they're pointed out as part of this discussion. What I also did not do at this stage as part of this was to go into any details about anything that was anecdotal, because again, what I am hoping to achieve, and hopefully Alita is aligned with this, is I, that we're going to be able to discuss today what everyone is experiencing in terms of the impacts, especially as it relates to this district, and to be able to call out anything that they are seeing with their own eyes, whether it be good or bad or indifferent or whatever it may be. Because if there are any things that are of note that we want to try to address and see if there's any potential mitigation, this is the time to be able to say, oh, we're seeing this here, and I have some examples myself of that as well. So with that, let me just go through this quickly, and I don't want to spend a lot of time. Oops, I repeated this disclaimer again. So overall, there are seemingly fewer vehicular trips in the congestion zone. In the first month and a half, that was the equivalent of about 60,000 fewer vehicles a day, equivalent to a 10% reduction. This is coming from the MTA. The MTA also reported that crosstown traffic especially improved. Canal 34th and 57th Streets, they noted specifically. There's data showing that there is less noise as a result of less honking. And actually, this is really surprising. Not only did we see noise complaints reduce 69% over the first couple of months compared to the same period in 2024 in the congestion zone. There was 100% reduction in noise camera summonses. It went from 27 to 0 as per the DEP that runs them. And then there were also reports over the first few weeks, and I haven't seen anything more recent, that suggested that there were reductions in the number of crashes and injuries that were taking place because of the changes in traffic levels. That I really want to see more data to have any confidence in that, but I did think that was noteworthy that it was being reported. In terms of how, and this comes from the MTA, in terms of how the breakdown of vehicles that are entering the zone in January and February, the data was reported out, and it was very similar. In January, 68% were passenger vehicles, 22% for hire vehicles, 9% trucks, and um, it um, it varied very slightly in February, slightly fewer passenger vehicles, slightly more taxis and for hire vehicles. And in both months, 95% of the revenue that was generated during the peak periods, which again were 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. on weekdays and 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on weekends. And in terms of revenues, even though that's not necessarily what I want to really focus on, but I know people are interested. It's been averaging for the first few months about 50 million a year. It nets out to closer to 40 million a year because of operating costs, and then there are some other accruals that are accounted for as part of that as well. But based on the first few months, the MTA reported that there was 78 million in net revenue that's going to be transferred to the lockbox, and that they are on track to deliver the 500 million of net operating revenue that they spoke about once the new congestion pricing or the revised congestion pricing um, fees were announced when the program was reinstituted back in November.
Craig, wait,
Um,
while you have that on the screen, the previous slide, or this one, I'd just like to point out that the increase in taxis and for hire vehicles is 10% roughly, which is not a de minimis amount. And that's during a cold season, and that's before all the tourists come in the summertime. So I don't know if that's a trend that every month it will increase by a certain percentage, but that was the trend in London, certainly.
It's an interesting piece of information. And I also think, in my own personal opinion, um, that the the added cost for users of taxis and for hire vehicles isn't really enough to change anyone's behavior, and that there are probably people who otherwise would have been driving in the past and may now be taking for hire vehicles in and out of the congestion zone. Because if you're just doing the math, so that would make sense that we've seen that increase based on the pricing, the fee structure. At least that's my interpretation of it. Another key result is that there are faster bus times. So at this month's MTA meeting, the New York City Transit president spoke about on a citywide basis, a 1.3-minute reduction in mean travel time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is something that can be meaningful, especially for regular commuters that sometimes are seeing more than that. And depending on the length of a bus trip, that can be a somewhat significant percentage. Um, and 4% speed improvements overall, and a reduction in bus bunching, which is really critical to allowing for buses to operate more reliably. Independent bus operators have also reported faster and more reliable travel times. Our old friend from the Transportation Committee, or somewhat frequent guest of the Transportation Committee, Patrick Condon from Hampton Jitney, has appeared at numerous MTA board meetings, talking about how he was a skeptic initially and how it's been transformative for his operations. Um, and based on running time improvements that have occurred, MTA, New York City Transit's about to start a pilot program on 7 routes, including 3 that operate in our district, the M31, the M66, and the M101, to remove some time points, which would allow bus schedules to be tightened a little to allow for shorter running times along those routes. So that is something that will keep our eyes on. And again, a few months of data doesn't necessarily suggest this is long-term and sustainable, but it's a good sign at least for bus operations. And also, MTA does regular surveying of their passengers, and apparently, passengers do seem to be reporting higher customer satisfaction levels as a result of the increased travel times. And the highest increases in customer satisfaction have been on express routes, and those coming from places like Staten Island. And the New Jersey operators have been reporting the same thing.
Are they
Um,
keeping track? I'm sorry, Craig,
no,
again,
no, go
because
right
we're
ahead.
talking about buses. Are they keeping track of the ridership and the crowds on buses and whether each bus is becoming more crowded with people not using their cars? I mean,
Um,
are there statistics for that, whether or not you might have had access to them?
I was looking for data from New Jersey, and I haven't been able to come up with any as of yet. And also because of the nature of the New Jersey operations. There are obviously many trips that are operated publicly by New Jersey Transit, but there are many private operators as well that don't report data out in the same way. So I don't know on the Jersey side. I didn't have a chance to dig into the data to check out the express routes.
What about
In
just the regular MTA buses?
there have been ridership increases. I don't want to comment on them because I don't know if you want to get into the cause versus causality
No, I'm
versus
just,
correlation. Yeah,
and there may
I
be
don't want to.
there
Yeah,
may be anecdotal stories from the public later on in this meeting, but I'm just I'm just wondering if that's a statistic that's being kept and made public along with all of the positive, so-called positive aspects of this, whether there is indications that the buses are just more crowded or not, if that's something that they're reporting.
definitely keep track of that. I don't know. It's hard to report whether buses are getting overcrowded or not in the same way. There just isn't that one metric that is reported out like a system-wide on-time performance. We use the term load factors in transportation to talk about how crowded buses are, and that's not something that is generally reported out. I'm sure there will be reports coming out over time, but we shall see.
We should
But
keep,
again, yeah,
I,
I
I'm
do know
sorry,
bus ridership has increased. Had a little bit of a spike. I don't think it was a huge percentage. I don't remember what it is offhand, but I don't know if that if if you compared it to a year prior. But again, there are other factors where sometimes year to year, especially with something as major as congestion pricing, it's a little hard to know whether that's the reason for it or not.
no, but just knowing if there has been more ridership and on what
Yes.
lines would be something interesting, especially I think you had mentioned at a previous meeting that buses have the capability of tracking the number of people that come on the bus that is not related to how many people pay their fares, because I've seen
Mm,
people get on buses and they don't pay. So
yeah,
I
no,
think it's just
that's an issue.
important to note about whether people are comfortable. And I'm sure that you're tired of hearing this, but in London, they bought 800 buses before they implemented congestion pricing. I don't think they've bought any buses here. And if they're anticipating an increase in ridership as people don't take their cars, I think it would be an interesting statistic to know is what the bus ridership looks like. But I'll stop there and you should proceed. And thank you for
That's
allowing the
all.
interruption with
Yeah.
your presentation.
Yeah, no, it's all very fair. And also I'll just note that because of COVID and the impacts of on ridership on both subways and buses as a result of COVID, there is excess capacity compared to where we were before COVID on both subways and buses. So there wasn't there may have been a different need if we hadn't seen um, the loss of ridership that we did that has not fully come back. I think it's come back more on buses than subways, and it's most of the way there, but it's not fully there. And that has also again, that's why sometimes it's really hard to make hay out of the tremendous
I,
amount of data that is available.
I understand, and there may be an inclination to present data that's more favorable, but I have one more question. In tracking bus speeds or car speeds across and down the borough, do they look at days of the week? Because weekends are one thing, Mondays and Fridays are another. A lot of people go into work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if there's a decrease on Monday and Friday and not on the rest of the week, that says something different, that people are still using their cars to come into work during the middle of the week. So I don't know
Believe
if they parse it out by days of the week or
I
not.
believe all that data is available, and the MTA has released and I could show that on the screen. Their data portal. I have not had a chance to fully dig into it, but I think they get into granular levels of data when it comes to a lot of this. And I'm going to show something in a few minutes that comes from another source that allows you to look at the impacts on a day-to-day basis. And you could choose the day of the week. So quickly, just in terms of travel times, this again comes from the MTA's February board meeting. I'll note and also just pay attention to this because again, I'm going to show something that in a little while that may not necessarily tell the same story, but I think there's a reason for it. Just showing some of the decreases in travel times here, and just note the Queensboro Bridge, westbound, inbound into New York, um, was reported as being down 26%. And then the MTA showed some other data. I don't want to harp on it, but they've been promoting this um, as a success that it doesn't seem as if there have been impacts on pedestrian traffic, that there have been positive aspects to that. Again, hard to know just from a month of data, and there are other factors that go into it. Broadway attendance is up, and there could be many reasons for that. Maybe congestion pricing's resulting from that. Maybe it's that there are some mega stars that are creating a lot of buzz on Broadway, but either way, you'd rather see this number higher than lower. They talk about restaurant reservations being up. Again, can't see whether or not this is the case, and that's one of the reasons I want to show this, because there everyone's looking to frame it, and some of this I will honestly say looks good, but I don't want to. I don't necessarily buy into this yet having any relationship on congestion pricing. This one I think is a little more reality based, because this is talking about the percentage of days over the same period, I believe 2024 versus 2025, in which the crossing time on the crossings themselves um, were free flowing versus having delays of more than 3 minutes. And you could see that the numbers here, the pink is the current year, and how much less traffic and how much more reliable those those crossing times are. So again, that's something that is a promising sign at first in terms of how it's working. And then the last few slides I just want to quickly talk about. There's an interesting website. Some of you may have read about it. It's called Congestion Pricing Tracker, congestion-pricing-tracker.com. And what this attempts to do is it uses Google traffic data, like from Google Maps, what everyone can pull up on their cell phones, to try to essentially measure what the impacts of congestion pricing have been. So I just pulled this up earlier today. So they have 3 different lines, and because I pulled it up and it happens to be a Thursday, I don't have this week's data because that would have been today. But the blue on these charts represents before January 5th. And if you look here at the information that they provide, they say pre-January 5th averages are calculated using about 16 weeks of pre-data. We're averaging the same weekdays across dates in May, June, July, August, and December of 2024. So those are higher volume traffic months. So I think they're trying to make that disclaimer that you're going to have some variation, and it's not necessarily apples to apples, but you can see what's happening in certain routes, as they call it, that they are tracking. So this first one here, and again, I pulled data for Thursdays because it tends to be the day with some of the highest congestion levels, or not volume levels, I shouldn't say congestion here. And they showed an instance of a trip that is being performed from what they call Lenox Hill to Battery Park, Lenox Hill with a starting point of East 62nd Street and Madison Avenue, and then taking the FDR Drive to go to Bowling Green. And you could see from the charts here that generally, since congestion pricing was implemented, you see that the red line after congestion pricing tends to be below the blue line, especially in the afternoon and evening hours. If you look in the mornings, it tends to be relatively comparable, and then you see where the impact is later on in the day. So I just have a few other examples that are noteworthy to our district. The next one, the Queensboro Bridge itself. And this is what I was talking about in terms of how sometimes you may see different data sets, and you could have vastly different results. So when you look at the map from this site and what they're referring to with the routes, they are literally talking about the crossing time itself. So the lower, this is via the lower level, basically where right before the bridge actually begins, and the end point of this data is Tramway Plaza. And interestingly, you could see that there's actually a longer travel time on Thursday mornings during the morning peak period. And that could be as a result of the pricing policies on the Queensboro Bridge and how traffic is now um, being, or people are making different direction decisions based off of the Queensboro Bridge tolling and the Midtown Tunnel tolling and, total when you consider the added congestion fee and the offsets. So it is interesting that in the morning you're seeing this, but then as the day goes on, you see the reverse and you see some pretty significant impacts in a positive way as the day goes on. And the other thing that I would just note is that when the MTA provided their numbers, I think what they were doing, and I think the chairman referred to this during some of his discussions, they're looking at longer segments of roadway. So they talked about much better travel savings on the Queens Midtown Tunnel. And I think they were taking the entirety of the approach to the Queens Midtown Tunnel as opposed to this congestion pricing tracker that literally was taking from the point where the tunnel begins to the tunnel ends if you were to pull up their data for the Midtown Tunnel. So it's like on the Jersey side, the Lincoln Tunnel crossing time may not to get through the tunnel, you may not see a significant impact, but if you take it out further along the helix and further back, you may see different and more impacts there. So quickly, this map shows the 50th Street situation. I know outside our district, but not too far. And this shows how, again, throughout the day, especially as you get later into the day, there seems to be travel time savings now compared to the data from before January 5th. In the case of the FDR Drive, they want to look at um, an area in which that was exempted per se. You'll recall that the policies of congestion pricing exclude the FDR Drive unless if you're taking it like either across West Street or across the Brooklyn Bridge. And you see here that you don't see as much of an impact. You'd see a little more towards the evening on Thursdays, but it's not as present as it is in the other charts. And then finally, they also did a route looking at those who come close to the congestion zone. So a route that starts in Washington Heights at 158th and Amsterdam and ends at 2nd Avenue and 61st Street. Again, this doesn't enter the zone. You wouldn't necessarily see a huge impact. You're seeing a little bit of an impact, which may speak to the fact that there are fewer vehicles that are coming in towards the zone. So that's a lot, and that's just an overview, just to paint a picture. And again, it's not to say, oh, congestion pricing is perfect or it's working great, but this is the data that has been generally presented. And I know there are people who may not necessarily agree with it or agree with the way that it was done, but that's we'll have that discussion. So I
I
hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to talk further.
Thank you, Craig. I have a question, though. There was a lot of concern from environmental justice communities like the South Bronx, like the area around Chinatown and the Lower East Side that were bordering the zone, where there were concerns that there would be an increase in traffic. Is any of that being monitored? Traffic, air pollution, in those areas? I think the the Cross Bronx Expressway, my father told me when I was a little girl that it was always a parking lot, and I don't think that's changed, but I'm wondering if it's even more of a parking lot, and if they're tracking that kind of information as well. I know it's not related to the district, but it is related to air quality around the city. Air doesn't stand still.
It is definitely being tracked, and there were some articles published just a couple of weeks ago. I didn't include it because I was trying to focus on things more related to our district, but the initial data has showed that so far those concerns regarding what was going to about shifts in traffic patterns that would be more pronounced in places like the Cross Bronx Expressway in the South Bronx and Staten Island because of people would be using Canal Street less, haven't necessarily borne out that the data has been pretty consistent. Again, I haven't had a chance to see to look into it very closely to be able to validate that, but there have been reports in the news that are easy to Google where you'll be able to see what those reports were. And in terms of, I haven't seen anything regarding environmental impacts, and those are and that's also because I think that's often not necessarily released on a regular basis. I know locally here, um, we as I live right by the Marine Transfer Station, and sometimes it will take months for the air quality monitoring results to be able to be released coming from those monitoring stations that are near here. So I'm eagerly waiting to see the air quality impacts of this. You mentioned Canal Street. I think I alluded to this earlier. Reports and data shows that Canal Street has seen a lot less traffic there. I can say anecdotally, from my own personal experience, having been down there a few times, that it seems significantly less chaotic than it was. That's not to say that those who have to pay to enter the zone to go there and aren't feeling impacts in the wallet, or that businesses may or may not be feeling impacts based off of number of customers they have coming by car versus by other modes of transportation. But from a congestion standpoint, that's my understanding that Canal Street has seen some significant improvements in terms of conditions over there.
Yeah, I also meant the area by the East River, but that's okay. Leah has her hand up. Let's and a couple of people from the public. So let's go to Leah and then Dylan.
Hi, thank you very much. Interesting numbers. Did I miss any data about the trains, meaning the LIRR and Metro North and Jersey Transit? Because you'd expect that the passengers would be increasing a lot.
Yes, and again, I try to keep it condensed to the data that was more closely related to our district, but my understanding from the data is that there have been some ridership increases on Metro North and Long Island Railroad, and that's been somewhat widely reported. I'm trying to see if I could pull something up right now.
Look, I will just Google it then. I hadn't seen that, but I'm sure it's out there, as you say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank,
Leah.
thank you. And if I have an answer in the next few minutes, I will let you know.
Good. Okay, Dylan and then Emily.
One out. Long Island Railroad ridership was up 10% this February compared to last. Metro North ridership increased by 5%. Again, you don't know whether there were other factors in play that related to it, but you'd rather see that number increase rather than decrease.
It will increase as long as there are sufficient
Yeah.
trains. It becomes an overly crowded condition to pick up the overflow. So we have a number of people. Dylan, thank you for your patience.
Hi. Hey, Craig. Thank you for giving us the data. Thank you so much. This is helpful. I work for PwC, so we did a lot of data wrangling of the actual license plate data that came in. And it matches a lot of this, but we've also seen, especially in the recent couple of weeks and months, as the weather gets nicer, traffic is going like this as well, as we'd expect. So as Craig said, it remains to be seen to see what happens. But are we allowed public comment, by the way, as well?
And no, this is the point in time where I invite everyone to provide for public comment. And as I said,
okay,
my hope is that anyone who has stories that they've seen, personal anecdotes that may point to something we should be aware of, this is the time to share it.
So
Could I just ask, just followed up on what you were saying, Dylan, you're tracking and what Craig is noticing, is if we're looking at license plates from out of state, New Jersey, we don't know if they're commuters or they're visitors, and it's true, we don't know with New York plates either, but from someplace further away, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, they're less likely to be commuters. Are we looking at where the license plates originate, A, and B, is there, I know originally there was a movement about fining people, punishing people who cover up their license plates and make them illegible. Is there more emphasis on that so that the tolls that everyone else is paying is paid by everybody altogether? I don't know if you could answer that, Dylan, and I'm sorry we weren't
yeah,
anticipating a question of your own material.
actually, so when I ran the code, it was a pandas import. It was something. It was millions of lines of entries. So I can tell you in a typical day. So they're broken down by vehicle class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then taxi, TLC taxi slash FHV. So the data is about right. It's about 20 to 24, but we've been actually seeing an increase, more a 10% or 15% increase on taxis and FHVs as taxis and FHVs realize that they are completely exempt. So the cost is passed on to the rider, but actually the driver is not charged at all. So they are exempt. There are articles on the Gothamist about this, so I won't go into it. We've also seen the MTA data doesn't, I don't think actually shows it shows license plate state, but I'd have to look at the data again. I'd have to because we didn't program it for that. Anyway, so does that kind of answer your question before I get into mine?
No, it does. And I just like to note as a digression for a second that the companies of Uber and Lyft are also not paying anything. It's just the passengers.
Correct. Yes.
So please proceed, Dylan, and thank you.
So let me be clear before I start. I'm not against the premise of congestion pricing. We all want clean air in a livable city. But the way that this is implemented, it's causing a lot more problems than, it's trying to solve. And it's especially punishing neighborhoods like ours here in the Upper East Side in the way that it's implemented. I'm sure the data says that travel times are reduced, but there are still ways to do that without being inequitable. Right now, the MTA is charging us $9 just to drive half a block to the 59th Street Bridge. No off-peak exemptions, no free alternative to Queens or Brooklyn, because North, Triborough, South, all tolled. So that's around $3,000 a year just to leave our own neighborhood if you drive.
Well, except for the Brooklyn, I'm sorry to interrupt, the Brooklyn Bridge is not tolled at this point.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
And just John, could you stop sharing the screen just so that we could see the faces of the people speaking better, please? Thank you.
Hello. Sorry, Craig.
I can get my camera to work, so I apologize for that.
No worries. And so, for all of us, it's either a 40-minute detour or pay $9, right? And for those of us who are just, half a block going in just to leave, and we're not even, entering the zone, it feels like a cash grab. And, it goes to the MTA, which is an agency that we know spends $100 million on an elevator, and the congestion cameras that cost $500 million. And it still can't manage a budget. They've requested Albany for more of our money. That's not climate policy. That's a tariff to cover decades of waste and mismanagement. And if we need a reminder today, who else likes tariffs? Donald Trump. Today, Governor Hochul called his tariffs a tax on working families. But the one she imposed does the exact same thing to us, right? For Upper East Side residents who want to use the Queensboro Bridge to leave, it's a Trump-style regressive tariff on leaving and coming home. And so, this is not how government is supposed to work. This is not good government. So one of the things I'm proposing, and I will shut up after this, is hopefully we can push for a smarter time-based system like London that charges during business hours and peak times on weekends, right? We saw from the data that 95% of the time, 95% of the entries are during peak times. So outside of peak times, especially when the MTA at 2 o'clock in the morning, nobody wants to get on the subway for safety reasons. please let us drive home. Number 2 is protect access to the 59th Street Bridge for us local residents. This neighborhood did not sign up for a Trump tariff on going home. We deserve better, and we need your help to make sure we get it. Thank you.
And apropos of what you were saying also about the taxis, I just want to point out that the drivers are commuting to work in the same way that hospital workers are commuting, that school teachers, office workers, everybody else are commuting, but they are getting a free ride.
Right.
And so for me, this has always been an issue. I know we've raised the idea that, well, which is separate from what passengers are paying, which has also been an issue for this community board. But I'm concerned that the drivers, and that's why we may well see a continued increase in not taxis so much, but the Ubers and Lyfts, because their drivers are not having to invest at all, nor their companies. And then there are exemptions for electric vehicles, and those will clog the streets potentially as they have in London. And so that has always been a concern to me. Thank you, Dylan, for your analysis and your thoughts on this and for the work that you've done. And Craig, if I didn't mention it before, all that data is useful too. It seems potentially a little bit incomplete, but I know it's only 2 months and some of the metrics I think don't kick in for a while. Thank you again. Let's go to Emily. Thank you for everyone waiting and
Hi.
comments. Hi.
So I only have really anecdotal evidence. I live 84th and Lex, so I'm a little bit further up from where the congestion zone is. But I have noticed I tend to go out if I can during the day just to walk up Fifth Avenue to get some exercise. Fifth Avenue along Museum Mile, at least from 84th all the way to 110th Street, is a gridlock every single day. Like between the hours of, let's say, at least 10 and 2, just absolute gridlock, large trucks, everything. I think that may be a backup from where the congestion zone starts. My office, when I go to the office, it's at 34th and 8th, and so that's squarely within the zone. I often go to 42nd Street as well, just for different errands when I am working. But I've noticed it's odd that they're claiming that traffic's moving faster, yet at the same time they're instituting congestion pricing. They've been reducing the actual number of travel lanes. So across 34th Street, especially across 42nd Street, they're literally down to 1 lane in each direction for travel. Dedicated bus lanes, which in my experience seem empty about 90% of the time. Along 34th Street, every single day there's bus drivers who just sit and park the buses, blocking the entire bus lanes, taking breaks. So it's like they're not even using the bus lane for the buses, yet somehow traffic's moving faster. And I just find all of that hard to believe. So that's just my 2 cents.
Has your travel time just anecdotally increased? Is the congestion in front of and through Museum Mile, is that worse now than you recall in the fall or a year ago?
I call it ever being as bad as it is, like literally every single time I go out during the day. Because at night there's no traffic really anywhere. But during the day, it is just from 84th Street all the way up, which is where I get on, all the way up to 110th. It's just like gridlock traffic, people laying on horns. Even the garbage trucks are laying on the horns. It's just like bumper to bumper traffic on Fifth Avenue every single day, like I've never seen.
Only to 84th? I'm just wondering. Only to 84th Street, south of 84th.
Well, that's where I live, so I tend to run
okay.
like north and then back down. But I could actually look further down to see if it is also the case there. But I definitely, like, I've heard people anecdotally, they talk about concerns that, the congestion pricing zone, it's supposed to the extent it's supposed to have environmental benefits, it's supposed to provide, quiet and cleaner air for the people in the zone, very small portion of New Yorkers, but it backs up traffic in other areas. And my experience is that it is in fact backing up traffic in other areas where people live.
I'd be interested in looking more into that and seeing, and as the data as more data analysis is performed and as some of the agencies get down to those levels to see what's happening on specific roadways, both into and approaching the zone and elsewhere in the city. It's one of those things where I know New York City DOT is keeping track of it, and I would imagine that as time goes on, they will be reporting it. And let me I'm sorry, don't mean to now steal the spotlight, but just going along with to follow up on your comments in terms of anecdotal data. So I know from my personal experience, from my personal daily commutes, I have seen since congestion pricing started, 96th and First has become particularly problematic. So I just want to acknowledge that it is entirely feasible and reasonable to think that there could be something going on. And again, we don't know what it is yet, but I did bring this up to someone I know from New York City DOT, and I think he did verify that the data is showing that there is more activity by 96 and First approaching the FDR drive entrance. So again, to just no, I can't validate what you're saying personally, of course, but just the fact that I want to report that out because it's just one of those things I noticed. And again, as we try to put together a picture of what the impacts are in this community, I think it's helpful to hear stories like yours.
Even with 96th Street, it's like it's the same thing. It's like they've closed the road down, so it's literally only one travel lane in each direction. It is the crossroad that sort of bridges people. They can enter the FDR, they can enter the Hudson River Drive from
Yeah,
96.
I'm actually referring to First. I should have been clear. I'm referring
I
to
mean straight
First Avenue
across.
approach.
But
Yeah,
but it's
all the
straight
vehicles
across.
trying to turn from 91st on. I know what you're saying, but I'm
People
seeing
turn
the
left or
impact on
right.
90.
Yeah.
Yeah, making the right turn northbound First Avenue onto 96th Street, trying to get onto the drive.
Well, that
But
could
there's no separate turning lane anymore.
and it could also be, and there's a bus lane there that didn't used to be there, and it could also be people who don't want to go south to get on the FDR in the 60s because of backed up traffic from people trying to avoid the zone and turn off before they get to 60th Street. So we don't really know. There's no one standing at the corner and with a clipboard asking people what they're doing. But Emily, I have one more question for you. Do you take the train to get to work?
So generally, yes. When I go to work, I take the train, either the 456 or normally the Q.
Is it more crowded? Have you noticed any change in ridership?
I know in the mornings it is very crowded, especially on the Q. Um, yeah, I've noticed on the Q it's definitely always extremely crowded. At night, again, not so much, but again, at night there's actually not even within the zone, outside of the zone, there's no traffic anywhere.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Mary Beth?
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm a long New Yorker. I'm a non-driver and I live now on East 71st Street, but I've always lived, well, for most of my life, I've lived on the Upper East Side, and I couldn't be more happy about congestion pricing. Before, there was just practically constant gridlock during the day. When you're crossing the streets, you have to weave in and out of cars and trucks. Very dangerous for old people or people pushing a stroller. Now it's so much more pleasant. It's a lot more quiet. And I take buses, trains, and although I'm not a driver, a lot of times I'll be in a passenger in a car with friends, and I'm more than happy to pay the $9 fee for all of the benefits that it's giving. The bus times, when I'm riding the bus, it's much quicker. They're not any noticeably more crowded. A lot of there have even been instances when the bus has to wait at a stop because they're ahead of schedule. And I just read that they're going to possibly, oh no, I think you mentioned that they might be adjusting times because of that. As far as Fifth Avenue, I have taken the Fifth Avenue bus from the north home sometimes to 71st Street, and it's historically terrible until you get to the Metropolitan Museum because of all of the taxis and school buses. As soon as you pass there, that usually clears up. So I think that has absolutely nothing to do with congestion pricing. I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mary
for those
Beth.
comments. And I'll just say I appreciate you talking about weaving between traffic. And I alluded to the data that was reported early on, which again was only a couple of weeks of data, but my personal experience with Canal Street, for example, is that, and I've heard other people talk about this, is that the reduction in congestion along Canal Street has changed the dynamic there. And I know whenever I'm crossing over by Canal and Lafayette or Canal and Broadway. It's that weaving that is extremely dangerous. And when I was down there recently, you didn't have that anymore. And it was sort of
Exactly.
a shock to the system. And that's why I don't necessarily discount the data in terms of crashes and injuries, and it may entirely be the case, but again, I don't want to jump to that conclusion. But what you're saying sort of speaks to why that may not why that may be something to look for going forward.
Thank you. Noah?
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I wanted to actually echo a lot of what Mary Beth said. So I live in the 90s. I actually live pretty close to the 96 and First, that area. And I will say I have noticed that like there isn't really a reduction in honking in that area. It's still definitely pretty busy. But I basically take the subway to work in Midtown in the 40s. And actually a few days a week, I usually walk from the 90s to the 40s and back to work. So I definitely see a lot of the different experiences of the different streets and all that. And I don't own a car, and most New Yorkers don't own cars. And I think that New Yorkers that own cars tend to be overrepresented at meetings like this. So I'm trying to do my part to represent those who aren't here. And also there are, of course, working class New Yorkers who own cars, but most New Yorkers that own cars are not working class. I have noticed that in general, the streets have been quieter, especially when you hit the congestion zone. It's much easier to cross the street, which I do a lot. And they seem to be moving smoother with less gridlock and less sort of bumper to bumper cars at the stops. I have two questions actually for Craig. There were a couple of stats that I've heard about, but I didn't see in your presentation. So I don't know if they're official or if they're being tracked. So one of them that I was wondering about was if you have any knowledge about, you mentioned the mean bus times, but the P90 and P99, percentile bus trips of the sort of the worst case bus trips, if there's any stats on those. The other one that I've heard about a lot is the subway crime rate. And I don't know if that's just sort of a random correlation or if there's strong evidence to suggest that it's related to congestion pricing, but I don't know if you can comment on those items.
Well, thank you for those questions. The P90, P99, I have not seen any reports there, and I don't know that I have access to that level of detail to be able to see. Hopefully, that will be something that New York City Transit will report out. In terms of, wait, your second question, I had an answer formulated. What was about what again?
Subway crime rate.
Subway crime rate, of course. So there have been reported increases in ridership um, uh, since congestion pricing began. Whether you can correlate that to any reductions in the crime rate, there's been a lot of discussion about that. And I think the story behind the story in some cases in regards to the future of congestion pricing has to do with the picture of the crime rate and public safety in the city and the extension, that 30-day extension that I alluded to, was sort of steeped in the context of, well, you need to show us what you're doing to make the subways and transit system safer, and we need all this data, which turns out to be largely already available. So I don't know that you can truly make a case that more people on the subway have resulted in changes in the subway crime rate over the past few months. That being said, I think it is there is data to support that the more people that generally ride the subways is a deterrent to crime. I think that's just something that's been that law enforcement would back up as well. So I hope that answers the question. It really wasn't much of an answer, but it's the best I have.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Laura Gregor and then Sharon, Pope Marshall, and then back to you, Dylan. Is that okay? Laura?
Oh, hi, thanks. Just personal observation, so much quieter. I live in the 60s. It's much quieter, less honking of horns, less traffic. So I think that's been great. I generally would drive a lot back and forth to Long Island, but now since they opened up Grand Central Madison, it's very easy to walk there, and I take the train a lot more. So I'm doing all the things that are supposed to be done with congestion pricing. So I think it's been pretty beneficial. I think one of the things that I don't think we spoke about is revenue raised from the tolls, and then like tracking that for progress and capital improvements, like the Q train was enormous for this community, as well as Grand Central Madison. And so accessibility. And so, investing in the improvements, I think that is not, I think it's very progressive way for people that do drive. I know, Dylan, you're impacted a lot with your driving, but I think by offering more options for public transit, we enable much more of the population, especially the people that are lower income, to get around and give them more opportunities. So
thank you, Laura.
Thank you. And actually, can I ask Laura a question, since you said you live in the 60s?
yes.
So I'm just curious whether you have heard anything from any of your neighbors or peers in your area in terms of any impacts in regards to parking. I know we've had a lot of discussion on this committee about the fears that people would be inundating the 60s, trying to park outside the zone, and the fear that would cause congestion. I'm happy to hear that you're saying that you're seeing less congestion and activity in the 60s. I don't know whether there have been impacts in terms of parking or garage availability. I don't know if you've heard anything.
Yeah, I live on 65th. We really don't have, we have very little street parking, and we've lost all of that over the years. So I don't think that has really changed. So I don't think there's a lot of people cruising around looking for parking. And I thought that all the garages would be more filled, but that hasn't been an issue either. So, and I have to say, I did take a bus uptown Madison Avenue. There's still a lot of construction on Madison Avenue going up and down, and I thought it would fly going up to the Metropolitan Museum, and it was slow. But I know going crosstown, midtown, I've been like zooming around, and my daughter will take like an Uber up. She's a riding instructor up at Riverdale Stables, and she's like, my Ubers are so much faster and cheaper. And so we've seen a lot of positive benefits. So I'm glad that I'm hearing the people that are having negative benefits. And I will say on Long Island, a lot of people are complaining about it, but these are people that were never coming into the city anyway. So I think there's a lot of noise too. People just don't like the idea of it.
And that very much may be the case. And some of we spoke in the past on this committee about public perceptions of it and how polling tends to change. And some of the polls have borne out the fact that, at least among New York City residents, since congestion pricing begun, there has been a significant uptick in terms of the support for congestion pricing, whereas in the suburban counties and elsewhere outside of New York City, it has not necessarily improved to the same degree. But again, that's something that is, I think, just an interesting tidbit as part of this. But I think that speaks, obviously politics always matters, but we'll see how that plays out going forward. But I thought that was just something that I've seen and wanted to report as well.
I guess apropos of all of this, though, I'd like to see the statistics, ongoing statistics of the number or the increase in FHV as we move into the summer months, because it can contribute a lot to congestion. And if congestion is increased by the number of for-hire vehicles, then people's responses to congestion pricing might not be so favorable. When the streets are crowded, they don't care whether they're private cars or for-profit cars and drivers. So I think it's important to keep track of that, but I guess we'll see. If we could go to Erica and then Sharon Pope Marshall and then back to members of the public who've already spoken. Thank you for your patience, Sharon. Erica?
Thanks, Alita. Sorry, I had to come from another meeting or I would have joined earlier. Hi, Sharon. I have fortunately, unfortunately, whatever the case may be, I have spent an exorbitant amount of time on the Second Avenue bus the last 2 months or so, and it's not moving any faster by any stretch. It's just not.
Yeah.
And you know, it's anecdotal, but I'm hearing this from this, and again, I don't own a car, but I'm still opposed to the way that it has been rolled out on the backs of 99% of New Yorkers. I'm 100% opposed to it. And I don't own a car. I don't doubt that traffic needs to be dealt with, but there's a reason why the Department of Transportation didn't take this on, that they washed their hands to this. The MTA gets money from everywhere. And I'm sure everyone at this point has seen the fact that they have said that this is going to spread out. And I've never had any doubt that it's going to go to 79th Street and 86th Street and 96th Street, because at the crux of this is that the MTA mismanages funds. I've lived overseas. I've seen how things are implemented. I was in London when it was implemented, and for years after that, and I lived overseas, and they're having issues with it and backpedaling on stuff. So I'm just really tired of the thousands and thousands of people's voices that are opposed to the way it's been done, just being tossed aside and not considered. It's not fair. And the extra cost is not fair to people living in Manhattan. They've divided up my parents' apartment is on 9th Street and University. And my mother died the end of February after a brief illness. And I'm having to run back and forth there now with my dad, who's 78, and I have MS. So the fact that they divided up Manhattan is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm tired of these things not being taken into consideration by our electeds and all of the people and the organizations that continue to support it, who, oh, by the way, get money from Uber and Lyft.
I'm
It's
sorry to
not
hear
fair.
about, well, and that point was raised by someone else earlier too. And I have some other, I was doing some research, but I'll address that at the end. I'm sorry to hear about your mother, Erica. That's rough. And
Yeah,
please accept our condolences.
Thank you. But
yes, I was going
dividing
to
up
say the same thing.
Manhattan is ludicrous.
Thank you
Thank you.
for your comments. Sharon.
Thank you, Alita. And Erica, I'm so sorry to hear about your mom. I just wanted to follow up with what Emily said, as well as Mary Beth and Noah regarding increased traffic around starting about the 80s and the 90s and really going up to, above 100th Street. I don't think that that has anything to do with congestion pricing. I think that is all Mount Sinai. And we have to remember that Mount Sinai has significant hospital facilities on Fifth Avenue, as well as on the side blocks, really starting at around 98th on up. Having said that, I understand that around 96th Street and First Avenue, or 96th Street and Second Avenue, there does appear to be a bit of an uptick regarding increased traffic, but I'm really wondering what percentage of that is due to congestion pricing, and again, how much is that due to patients and staff from Mount Sinai Hospital going back and forth to the various facilities. I will say that although I'm in those areas a lot, I am also around 60th Street, 59th Street, 61st Street, and 2nd Avenue. It has been amazing, amazing. I have really seen, previous to congestion pricing, nothing moving. Coming off the Queensboro Bridge, people coming down from 2nd Avenue. There were many times prior to congestion pricing in which almost nothing moved, and I witnessed it after congestion pricing. First of all, oddly enough, I first noticed that there was less horn honking. I don't know what it is, but I'm getting really sensitive to the decibel levels in this city, and in particular, horn honking. And once I noticed that, I just noticed that there were less cars. You know what? I find that I don't really have to go below 60th Street for much. So I don't know how it is below 60th Street, but in the area of, say, 59th up to 61st, 62nd, I have seen a significant decrease in congestion. Traffic is moving. That's it anecdotally from my personal observations and experiences. Thank you so much, Craig. Thank you, Alita.
Thank you for sharing the anecdote. That's all that we could rely on if it's not official statistics. So it's always good to hear. Thank you. Let's go back to Dylan and Leah, and then I have a few questions, Craig, that I don't know that you could answer, but maybe they should just be posed anyway. Dylan?
Sure. So first thing to respond to your question, data doesn't have NY versus New Jersey or whatever it is. I think it used to, it doesn't have it anymore. So that's just one thing. I just pulled the data. Doesn't have that. So unfortunate. The other thing is, so one thing, yeah, Noah, I hear your concerns. I am a car owner. I actually work for the Coast Guard Reserve on the weekends. So I'm the one with going with firearms, and I cannot bring firearms on public transport. Otherwise, I wouldn't be driving. Generally, really want me to bring firearms on public transport for a number of reasons. So one of the things that I actually noticed anecdotally on 3rd Avenue is, we've talked about this, Craig, you know about this, is so they narrowed 3rd Avenue to, and they included the big bike lane. And they also, without the community board's notice, changed all the limits to 15 miles an hour. So what I've noticed living along 3rd Avenue, especially in the upper 60s, lower 70s, is it's incessant honking, because it's 5 lanes of traffic that goes into 3, that goes into 2, with a 40% reduction in throughput, with all of the only freeway into the city now, like the upper level of the Queensboro Bridge is free. So that dumps all of the northbound traffic onto 3rd Avenue. And with all of that traffic, it becomes and double parking, and, you have people unloading and loading. There's a Whole Foods right here. I live above the Whole Foods. And then there's an Ori's across the street. And then when they're both having deliveries, it's 1 lane. It's horrible. And then it's nonstop incessant honking. And when you do that, and then you lower the throughput by 40%, I think a lot of it is the DOT going, hey, we have reduction in traffic, let's reduce everything as well. And then they do a lot of things unilaterally, as we found out yesterday on the congestion, on the transportation committee, that, Julie Menon, our city council member, sent a letter to the DOT going, WTF. The DOT said, nope, we're not going to respond to you. I actually called Julie Menon's office this morning and said, hey, did you actually get a response? And they said no. The other thing is I ended up on the front page of the New York Post because I got charged $45 a day multiple times for congestion pricing.
Oh,
What do you mean?
So I'll send you I'll send whoever, I think Jonathan, the link, but I ended up on the New York Post because Easy Pass basically charged me $45 a day instead of $9 to go into the zone. And I called Easy Pass and was on hold for 45 minutes to an hour, and they were like, no, you need to fax us a letter. I was like, no. And then I called the Post. But it's just stuff like that. I don't mind paying, right? Noah, it's like, I don't mind paying. It's like a system that costs $500 million shouldn't overcharge me $45 a day.
Well, it's being administered by a non-New York City entity as
Correct.
well, who doesn't have this level of experience with working with cities of this size and the magnitude of the task that has been entrusted to them. But $45 is 5 times the congestion fee, and trucks get charged every time they go into the zone. So
Correct.
maybe they think you're a truck.
No,
what was
actually,
the
it came up
situation? What
as
happened?
I came up as a passenger. I got charged $45 a day to the point where my Easy Pass overdrawn and then it overdrew my bank account. Because it was an auto charge, and then it hit the auto refill to like $400 because of these things. And of course, because it's not a transponder based thing, it's scanning your plate, unlike every single other toll where, like, if you rent a car, if you have an Easy Pass, you can put the transponder in the rental car, right? If you own a transponder, you can't do that. So you have to, like, if you rent a car or U-Haul, you're getting charged their fee, but that's a whole nother story. But yes, $45 a day. I got charged $45 a day for basically a week or two, and then they all hit my account at once, cleared out my account, pulled a lot of money out of my bank account, and then I called Easy Pass going, WTF, and they said, fax us your response. We'll get back to you in 7 to 10 business days.
Craig,
Did it get rectified?
what, Craig?
There you go.
Ever get
Thanks, Jonathan.
rectified?
Sorry?
Did it ever get rectified?
Yes, after the post that got published, I actually got a call from Liz Kruger. Liz Kruger's office saying, we're sorry, we've rectified this. And I think I got everything credited back in about 5 or 7 days, but I was out about quite a lot of money. And it's just that kind of thing. And I know it's Vero Mobility that runs the cameras. And it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, we should have tested this before it went live.
Craig and I were talking about the idea that you can't use a car that your Easy Pass is not connected to, and why they do that, because you can't borrow a car. If your car is in for repairs, you can't get a loan a car that will charge you that, or rent a car for some other reason. And we were speculating that maybe it's to avoid people just giving their Easy Pass to someone else to avoid the tolls. But I would think that there would be other ways of handling it, because it doesn't seem fair that you can't use your Easy Pass when you're in a car different than the one that is attached to that pass and the plates. So I don't know, maybe it's something else to raise at a later date. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dylan. I guess you got your 15 minutes of fame, but maybe not the way you wanted. Leah? Thank you. Leah?
Yes, hi. Regarding Easy Pass, which was not my question, if you have an online account with Easy Pass, which I don't, but if you do, you can change the license plate. My sister did that all the time when she came to New York and rented a car. She would just go in to her account and change it to the rental car's license plate for the week, and then she would change it back to, her own car. But you could do that and use your Easy Pass with a rental car that way. That's
interesting. I hope that the congestion pricing people see it the same way, but that's really interesting. I certainly didn't know that. I don't know if you did.
She only used it for bridges. She hasn't been back here since congestion pricing, but that wasn't my question. I actually just wanted to sort of share my experience. I go back and forth to Long Island to take care of my mother, who's very elderly and lives with my sister. So when my sister has days that she goes to work, I in the office. I drive out there and then take my mother to doctor's appointments and what. So, and I am not working because of this. So, I have been getting on the drive at 79th. I really appreciate Craig and the person from the last meeting who explained how to get onto the Brooklyn Bridge. The first time I screwed it up, but I think I've got it now. I'll find out when I get my Easy Pass statement. But it seems it's a crazy detour. It's a crazy carbon emitting long detour through local streets in Brooklyn. It's really crazy. But in reference to something somebody said earlier, I would qualify for the low income discount. It's actually a credit. It's free. You have no toll if you are low income. If you live below 60th Street, you do not have that if you live above 60th Street. And Liz Kruger's office swore to me up and down that there was a low income tax credit for people living above 60th Street, but then they finally admitted to me that there was not. But if you were me and you lived below 60th Street, you would get a tax credit at the end of the year equal to all of your tolls for Easy Pass. But if you live in our district north of 60th Street, you cannot get that. And since not everybody who has a car is working or rich or can afford $9, it seems unfair that you can drive through any bridge, any toll. It's all credited if you're below 60th, but we at least have the option to go to the Brooklyn Bridge, but it's a long, crazy detour.
I remember that from the last meeting. There is a program for people of low income. After the first, I think 10 times they use Easy Pass, and I don't know if you go there that frequently. It's certainly not the same. It's actually, I guess, about half.
It's not the same
Getting
one.
Getting it for free.
There is you get it for free, but only if you live lower than it. You can live in Queens, and if your income is low enough and you go more than 10 times, you get a discount. But you can get the tax credit only if you live south of 60th Street.
Yes, that is correct. There are two separate discount programs. There is what's called the low income discount. That is what you explained you are eligible for, and anyone who meets the income requirements and travels more than 10 times in a calendar month are eligible for. And then there is a separate low income tax credit for residents. And that is what you explained you are not eligible for because it is only for those who are residents of congestion relief zone.
Right. But we here, I mean, it's true if you live in the zone, you cannot go out of the zone and get back to your home in the zone without paying a toll. Whereas we can go on the George Washington Bridge if we want to go to New Jersey or Connecticut, and we can go to the Brooklyn Bridge if we want to go to Long Island. And it is true, we can do that. But that is a crazy detour. And if you lived in the zone, you could take the Holland Tunnel, you could go whichever way made the most sense and get reimbursed for the tolls. But we do not have that. And despite the fact that Liz Kruger's office swore up and down to me that we had that, until I finally pointed out to them that we do not. So it just seems like that's very unfair. Regarding parking, I have not done this enough times. We came back late from Florida this year because we both had COVID. But I have noticed that there doesn't seem to be as much turnover in spots late in the afternoon when contractors who've been parking there all day typically leave. It's possible that I just have a very small sample because I haven't done this all that many times yet, but I I'm not certain how easy, whether it's certainly not easier to park, but it seems that there's not as much turnover from contractors parking there. That's it.
Thank you. And I know it doesn't seem fair below the zone, or as someone earlier had mentioned, to charge people trying to get on the Queensboro Bridge from uptown, and it's a half a block or a block, to charge Dylan, thank you, to charge the $9. So thank you for making that point, Leah. Emily Jordan, who hasn't spoken before, and then back to you, Erica. Could you unmute Emily, John? Thank you.
Sure. I just had a quick question on the exemptions, because I had the good or not so good fortune of getting both federal and state jury duty 2 years ago.
You're
But is there
supposed to only do one, and then you're exempt for 4 years from either of them.
I got called for both at the same
Yeah,
time,
no,
and
that's
so then
not.
I hadn't served either, and it was like I had to appear
Well,
5
no,
times.
you're not supposed to do both. You're supposed to only have to do one. And I'm sorry, I know this has nothing to do with congestion pricing, but they don't make you do federal and state. If you do state, you're exempt from federal for as long as you're exempt from state after that, and vice versa. You are not required to do both. So for the future, but in the meantime, you did excellent civic duty. So thank you.
Well, unless you get the same 2 notices in the same week,
Get to call
unfortunately.
them and tell you can call them and tell them you've been summoned by the other one. They don't make you do both. I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer, but that's besides the point. I've also had jury duty, so this I remember. But thank you for doing
But I
that.
think I had another question about the exemptions or lack thereof. So one of the burdens or requirements for New York City residents, as well as believe it or not, Westchester residents, is that they all have to go for jury duty in Lower Manhattan. And if you think about people who are in a grand jury who have to be there for a month, are they even being like exempted or reimbursed for this fee at all? I mean, there are one of the concerns I had about congestion pricing before it's implemented at all is that really the majority of municipal buildings for the city, or at least Manhattan, are within the zone, as are most of the hospitals. And it does seem like a hardship just to put on people because you're acting as though they're going for frivolous reasons into the city and not because they have to.
And that came up before congestion pricing was implemented, when the MTA was seeking opinions, and it hasn't gotten an exemption having to go to any government building for any kind of business, including mandatory jury duty.
Okay, that was my 2 cents.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Emily, though, because it's a good point to raise. People who have to go to the government for whatever reason it is, are still not exempted. It's there's a lot of trickiness, and I think for a lot of people a sense that not everything was considered in a way that actually affect where there's an understanding of how things are, or how people are affected. So thank you for raising that point. Erica?
So Dylan, I will just say that in case people don't know that this, the company that the MTA, because in the, they're at least they're consistent with hiring companies that have no idea what they're doing. This is the first time this company, not only is it not in New York, so they didn't even choose a company in New York where there were companies that could implement it. They chose a company in Tennessee that has never done this type of program before, ever. So the amount of money that's going to be wasted on us being their test pilot is just beyond comprehension. The other thing is, Emily, to your point, our neighborhood here on the Upper East Side has more hospitals and more physicians and more healthcare facilities per capita than anywhere else in the country. And people come here from not just the outer boroughs, but other states as well. And the fact that you're getting charged for your health care when Queens they're a desert when it comes to hospital and health care. So if you're interested in that type of thing, I implore you to come out to the next meeting for Lenox Hill Hospital and what they want to do in the neighborhood, because this is all interconnected. Them building more is going to cause more traffic in the area as a result. So But I would just say that if there's a way that the MTA can screw something up and waste money, they do.
Thank you. One of the points I wanted to raise was in doing research for other than MTA statistics around this since January, was that I found a piece. It's not statistics, it's just someone's opinion. I'd never heard of the group before, but what they say was congestion pricing makes sense for reducing or eliminating congestion, but what it doesn't make sense for is its primary purpose of funding the MTA because of how badly the MTA manages money. We've seen it in cover stories on the Daily News over the last couple of years. We've seen it from anecdotes from people. We've seen it with our own eyes. And that was the point of that story. And although it's been taken down, I think initially the MTA had said their primary purpose was in getting funds. So I have some questions related to that I'll ask Craig after we go back to Dylan. So thank you, Erica, for those points. And yes, patients going to hospitals, whether for acute or chronic reasons, was raised early on in our discussions about the what seemed to be the unfairness of charging people simply to go to the doctor, kind of like rubbing salt in the wound, because they're already going for treatment, and to smack a $9 fee on them for that just seemed wrong to a lot of people who raised it. Thank you. If we could go to Eric and then back to Dylan, thank you. Just trying to get around people who haven't spoken.
Hello. I'm Eric. I just recently moved here several months ago.
Welcome.
Uh like around the 79th second area. So I actually came from San Francisco. So another place with like a lot of public transit and everything. And I gotta say, like coming here, it's been a marked improvement, at least with the public transit options for me to get around. I have definitely there. I've needed a car. Car was definitely optimal for like a lot of options in travel. Whereas here I've needed zero rides around. Not saying that like this is my own personal experience, obviously, but I really appreciated like the infrastructure that is in place. I hear a lot of like issues where basically people are opting to need to take a car. Dylan, your unique case, I guess, excluded. But I wasn't sure, like, I'm this is coming from ignorance here. So, it seems to me that like there needed to be for like a lot of options here for like some of these people needed to get around. There needs to be more of a focus on improved public transit and then shifting on to like having this additional cost to preventing some of these preventing like more cars and like preventing like kind of restructuring and like working on this local infrastructure. So I wasn't sure if there's been like a stronger push now for like more of these like major transit upgrades to allow for like a lot more of this clearer movement. I've recently moved here and so like very ignorant on this, but I know like some people have mentioned like a lot more like there's not been very many like train lines added and such. So
I
yeah.
I'll give you the quick version of the story. So the the law behind congestion pricing required that the revenues from it be put in a lockbox that goes to support the MTA's capital program. Um, so the last program was covered the years 2020 to 2024. And that was once congestion pricing was in place, assuming that it does not get stopped, that is going to allow that all the remaining projects that were part of that to be considered fully funded, or at least the portions that were in that program. Now we've moved on to the 2025 to 2029 program, and that's where you're hearing a lot of the controversy if you pay attention to state politics and also federal politics for that matter, in terms of how is the state going to be able to afford all the upgrades that include, in terms of expansion projects, whether it be the Second Avenue subway phase two going up to Harlem, and possibly across Harlem, the Interborough Express that would go between Queens and Brooklyn. Those are the two main capacity or expansion projects that are being talked about. So if I would suggest that you actually go pull up on the MTA's website, just Google MTA Capital Plan 2025 to 2029, and they talk about those types of projects, some of which will definitely, if you look at the capital project as a whole and congestion pricing, the congestion pricing revenues and the bonding that's resulting from it, that's going to support the MTA. It's specifically for the capital plan. So we always talk about how there's the capital budget and there's the operating budget. The operating budget is largely supported by that's where fair payment comes into play, because all the fare you've been hearing about does have a significant impact on the operations budget, but it doesn't have the same impact on the capital budget. The two are separate and distinct.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, Eric, there's a ton of information out there, both from the MTA and people who have comments on what the MTA is doing or on money to help you grasp the nature of this and where the money's going and all of the controversy surrounding this, as well as controversy surrounding how money's been allocated to the MTA and removed from the MTA. So there's a lot of information out there depending on how much time and how deeply you want to dive into this. But thank you for raising that, and thank you for appreciating New York City public transit. Okay, let's go to Noah, and then Emily, and then Dylan. Noah?
There you go. Thanks. So I just kind of wanted to add a little bit more color to some of the things that I've heard so far, because I think I've heard some complaints about the unfairness of the system, while also there's been more complaints about the waste and inefficiencies in the MTA. And my thought on this is actually that those two issues are a bit at odds, which is to say that the more that you try to solve for some of these unfairness issues, the more difficult you make the job for the MTA. So, I mean, I've heard like a lot of reasonable things, right? Like access for jury duty, access for healthcare, access if you have to use a firearm for work, things like that. But at the same time, you know, this is how we end up with a situation where we have all these complexities, all these carve outs, and then we spend 10 years studying the thing. That's how we get $500 million cameras, right? Is that we basically have to please every single interest group, and that causes this sort of this snowballing effect of making it worse for everyone. So there's in a sense a trade-off between the benefit that you might get and the money that you might save from having it apply to everyone and not have everything so means tested, which actually might save money for everyone sometimes in the long run, not always the case. So I just wanted to bring that up. And I also to the comment that I think Erica made about, you know, the company being kind of never having done this before. I think that this is also basically the first plan of its kind in the United States. So it kind of makes sense that there aren't any companies that may have implemented something like this before. So I think it's an interesting experiment, but that's it. Yeah.
I appreciate your comments, Noah. In terms of that company, they haven't dealt with a city this size before. They have worked in, I believe, in other areas of public transportation or gantries or this kind of thing, but not for anything near the size and complexity of New York. And with respect to the carve-outs and exemptions that various groups have wanted, that came way after allegations of MTA mismanagement of money, which has been going on for years and years and years. And so you're right. The more exemptions, the more carve-outs there are, the less money there is for the MTA, for the capital funding. But you could also go back and look at some of the articles that have been written about expenditures the MTA has made that may not have been the wisest way to spend money, such as not adequately supervising contractors on the Second Avenue subway, for instance, is one of the articles that the Daily News has had. The MTA is not awash in money, and that was the first purpose of this congestion pricing program. But thank you for your comments, and I know I have a lot of opinions on this, so I hope I'm not offensive to anyone. But thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
One more comment after just Eric's question. So I've been in New York. I'm not a native New Yorker, but I've been here better part of the last 25 years. And so I think people are just distrustful of the MTA and this entire project. I know they're spinning it nicely as upgrades and expansions, but there's basic work like just ADA accommodations, Americans with Disability Act accommodations that went to law over 30 years ago. They have never managed to do. In the 25 years I've been here, I've seen continual price increases, capital improvement, just anything to get more money out of taxpayers. And then they'll plan all of it to fund all these capital improvement projects. And then as soon as they get the funding, routinely, they pull the projects, they cut the projects, they never have the money. They have, like if you go, you notice the trains are always delayed, especially on the west side. It's because they have 100-year-old switches, signaling that they haven't fixed in 100 years and haven't budgeted to change. If you pay close attention to the trains and the stations, like they're filthy, they barely clean them. I was walking up 86th Street on the 4 the other day. There's like literal dust bowls on the sides of the stairs. They haven't mopped them in like months. And so that's sort of why it's like, yes, it's all fine and good that people wish the system was more reliable and they wish it was sort of more efficient and they wish it was better. And then we're trying to claim now, yes, we're trying to do all of this congestion pricing and to finally make all of these changes to really give us, the world-class subway system that, we deserve as New Yorkers. But a lot of us have just become over time extremely skeptical of that. And so maybe that's some of what you see with the distrust. So again, although there's upgrades and expansions and all these wonderful plans, I look at them with a grain of salt, and I know a lot of other people do as well. And it's not, the MTA actually, close to the beginning of my time in New York, they were found to have been keeping 2 sets of books to basically hide a $4 billion surplus when they were claiming a deficit. So like people by and large do not trust the MTA for those reasons. And that's not going to change anytime soon. So
I'd like to respond to that. So I'm just going to put in the chat something that everyone may want to look at, and that is a link to the MTA's 20-year needs assessment. And basically, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but there's a long history with the MTA and the New York City transit system, and there's a long history behind the politics of the system and the funding and the management of it. And there have been years and years in which the system was just unfortunately not maintained, not kept up as it should have been. And there's been a snowball effect that has resulted in a lot of the deficiencies that I think you have referenced and that others have certainly noticed as well, accessibility being a key one of them. And it's it it is such a huge undertaking to be able to try to bring the system to where we all want it to be. And that's why I want to at least acknowledge the 20-year needs assessment, because the MTA is not ignorant to the fact that it's trying to keep up. And a large part of the capital plan involves state of good repair, normal replacements, and just the regular upkeep just to try to keep the system running. And if you've paid attention to the news and seen some of the warnings coming out of the MTA, if congestion pricing or were to be killed, or if the federal government didn't provide the support that they had been providing in the past, it's going to have a direct impact on the capital plan. It's going to have a direct impact on the ability for the system to be able to avoid another so-called summer of hell like what was experienced in the summer of 2017, which was the accumulation of all the years of underinvestment. So I'm not saying that the MTA has been perfect, and certainly you can make you can write volumes and volumes of books about projects that were more costly than they otherwise could have been or could have been mismanaged in some way. I do believe that the MTA is much more keenly aware of the issues and trying to address them, and that they have done a much better job in recent years of transparency. I have now been a regular viewer of their board meetings, not only the full board meeting, which is usually the last Wednesday of the month, but all of their committee meetings on the Monday, where they really provide a lot of information and talk about a lot of these things. And they put out all the board packages and all the backing documents. So there's a lot to look at there. So I hear people's frustration. I understand why there's a lot of skepticism. Um, and I do want to just make sure people are aware that lack of investment has had consequences and can have future consequences. So that's one of the reasons really why congestion pricing as a policy was implemented. So that's just a little history there.
But
That was the
respectfully,
primary.
even with the congestion pricing, they're still claiming to have a $33 billion deficit.
And funding was the primary purpose behind congestion pricing. And I don't know what two sets of books you're referring to, Emily, but a few years ago,
2008, 2005.
okay,
maybe?
because a few years ago, the Daily News had a front page story about 3 sets of books from the MTA on bringing the LIRR into Grand Central Station. It was one for the public, it was one and the board of directors, it was one for the federal government, who was funding by billions of dollars the bringing in of the trains, and another set of books for the people actually on the project who needed to know what was going on. So the Daily News said that. I don't know what's true. I don't think we can believe anything that anybody actually says without looking at it carefully and parsing it and detail oriented, which I'm not equipped to do. And they kicked the can down the road for years on service, on switches, and all of that. And as Craig says, we're paying the price. It's just, how are we paying that price, and how is it on the backs of a lot of other people? It's a very, very complicated issue. The idea, as I've said, the idea that Uber and Lyft and the drivers walk away from this without paying a penny, when Uber and Lyft, as the increase in cars show, stand to make an enormous amount. I am not a finance person, obviously, from this, just seems to me inherently wrong when people who live in transit deserts are not able to come in by public transportation, or people who live in a district, in an area that the MTA thinks is fine for commuting, of a 2-hour commute each way. They think that, and they've said it, perfectly reasonable, and those people should have to commute 4 hours a day rather than take their cars into the district, or they would have to pay. So they're very complicated issues, and I'm not sure where the MTA is actually recognizing all of the problems and why not put an outside entity, not for $500 million, to look at what they're doing and make sure the money is spent right. And I don't know about that kind of stuff either. I just know about receivers in bankruptcy a little bit, but they're not in bankruptcy. It's complicated issues. We have a lot of interest groups. We have the Manhattan, the congestion zone district. We have Manhattan. Outside that, we have the outer boroughs. We have the suburbs. We have people who drive in from other parts of the country on vacation or for business. So it's very complex. And I certainly don't know the answers, but I don't think we could just rely on what the MTA is saying, or anyone else for that matter. I do have some questions.
Yeah, if I could just if I could just say one thing, and then I want to make sure I hear from you, and I know Dylan has his hand
Yeah,
up,
I
and
want
then
to
I
go back
just
to Dylan.
want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're coming up on 8:30. The only thing that I would say, I want to make sure I'm saying this carefully, is the MTA is a huge organization. They're not going to do everything perfectly. I think there's been a lot in the past that people can rightfully be frustrated with and have feelings about, but I would liken it to the current situation Dylan was referring to, tariffs. And I think there's, on a national level, a lot of distrust right now of the United States for various reasons. And I would hope that at a different point in time, no one just uses what's happening now as a foundation for never having trust in us again. I know that's a little bit extreme, but I sort of look at the MTA like that. They've made mistakes, and they're not, certainly not perfect now. There's a long ways to go, but I would hope that we can have a little confidence that they are trying to do the right thing and have shown improvement and are working on trying to do better. and
I'm
that
not
we
sure, but
don't hold everything from the past against them, because at some point the past is the past, and we hope that they've learned their lessons.
well, I'd like to see more actually taking responsibility for what's been done and working in ways to cure it or to prevent it from happening again. Because, well, I people, in order to learn from mistakes, we need to incorporate them and we need to figure out how to not do that again. And I'm not sure that the MTA is actually doing that, but I don't know that much about their inner workings. I think you're right. We should respect everyone's time, and I shouldn't go on with my platform and you should go on with yours. Let's hear from Dylan and then I'll ask my questions, and then we could, I guess, call it a night and thank everyone for their patience, if that's okay with everyone. Dylan, you've been patient. Thank you.
No worries. So, as a guy who got told hundreds of dollars in mistake for congestion pricing, I'm sure everybody knows my thoughts on how much I trust the MTA. Right? So take that anecdote. We're talking about anecdotes, so take that anecdote as a grain of salt. And hopefully you don't have to call the Post and end up on the front page of the Metro section to get your problem fixed. So generally, the MTA gets $6.8 billion in fares, $7.2 billion from the state, gets another $2.8 billion from the federal government. It also takes a additional chunk out of all payroll, so the MCTMT. For example, I own a car, I register in Manhattan, I have to pay another MTA tax to do that, right? Sales tax, mortgage tax, gas tax, payroll tax, rideshare tax, rental car, taxi cab, excess tolls, and all the other stuff. So for all of us who've been in New York for a while, right, who see all of these like accounts receivable, like AR on the accounts receivable side of the book, and then see a black hole on the other side, the MTA has been doing this, and then of course you have the state legislatures who take the MTA money and go build a Bills stadium. That's a whole nother story. But it's a lot of general mistrust of the MTA. Like I agree, like back to congestion pricing. I agree with the premise of it. I don't agree with how it was implemented. And I don't think New Yorkers in general trust the MTA to be honest stewards of our money. Like if you're taking our money, right? Please do something useful with it and don't squander it on $100 million elevators. Like it's one elevator. It's $100 million for the 68th Street Lenox Hill thing, right? An elevator doesn't cost $100 million. And it's just like stuff like that, right? It's like, oh, we're out of money and we need another $35 billion from the taxpayer. Yeah, when do we say enough is enough?
Well, I don't know that we can say enough is enough, because we need the public transportation system in this.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We need the buses, we need the trains, we need the suburban trains, and that's really the problem, is we can't just turn our back. But yet it doesn't seem, despite an inspector general in the state or whatever they're called, who doesn't really seem to be exerting much influence. But I don't know, and that's enough. But thank you for making those comments, Dylan. No, it's important, because there are many, I think, different sides of this, and different expectations of what the MTA could and should be doing, and different ideas of what wasting money is and how much they've actually wasted. So if you'll just bear with me for a second, Craig, I have a few questions. I don't know if you know the answers to this, but have more buses been ordered by the MTA? Where are the funds going, and is anyone actually keeping track of that? What's happened to ridership? Are drivers using public transportation? And what happens if drivers are using public transportation and not driving as much into the zone? What happens to the amount of money that the MTA expects? In other words, when the MTA made all of its financial projections about how much money it was going to get from congestion pricing, was it based on the amount of cars driving at that time, or was it based on the amount of cars minus the 15 or 20% that they expected to get on where the drivers would get on public transportation? Because that's a huge number. And now we're seeing not 15 or 20% reduction, but a smaller amount of reduction. So what impact is all of this having? And if there's inflation, as some people predict, what happens to the amount of interest payable on the bond that all of this is supposed to fund? I don't really know how any of that works either, which is the amount of money that they're getting from congestion pricing is being used to pay off the interest on the $15 billion bond that they're getting. But if interest rates go up because inflation goes up on bonds in order to sell them to the public, and I don't know what the MTA's credit rating is, does that impact the amount of money that they need to get from congestion pricing? So those are my questions. And I don't know, Craig, I'm sure, I guess, that you don't have the answers right now. And I don't know if the MTA or the state or the city or anyone else is providing all of that. But I think because the primary purpose of this was financial, I think we need to have answers to the financial aspect of this. And again, as inflation increases and maybe exponentially in a way because of the tariffs and because of just inherent inflation costs, what impact does that have on how much money they need in order to be able to complete all of these various projects? And why isn't there an independent somebody or other looking at the way that they spend money and looking at the way that they manage their construction projects? So I do have to say, though, that I went to a lecture on the MTA on public art, and the MTA's public art program and music in the subway program are outstanding. The amount of art and the beauty of it and the interesting nature of it, the exciting nature of it is really something worth seeing. So when anyone goes into subways, whether it's the new, and they focused on the new 7 subway at Hudson Yards, or anything, even the eyes that Peter Sis did over on 86th Street is more than eyes. They're just fantastic pieces of art that really, considering how dirty and awful the subways are, can really be distracting. So I urge everyone to just keep your eyes open when you go into a subway station, because they should be commended for that. But on the other hand, whether saying fare is required on the front of buses actually do anything, I'm not so sure.
Well, there's a lot there. Uh, I feel bad saying that. I think most of those questions I don't really have answers to.
I didn't expect
Um,
that, but there's something we should keep in mind, I think,
no,
moving forward.
yes, as I alluded to earlier, I don't recall there being any additions to the fleet of New York City buses or subways. That being said, clearly part of the capital plan is replacement of buses, replacement of subway cars. Um, they're doing a lot of work, what's called back of house work, to shore up all the critical infrastructure that help support the transit system. And that includes not only New York City subway, but I attended a presentation about the capital plan as it relates to the Metro North um, coverage area. And there's a lot that's taking place in and around Grand Central Station, because while the public areas are in great condition, what's considered back of house is in desperate need of upgrades and replacements. Ridership, as I said, that data is being tracked, and there's a lot of data on the MTA. I know that John posted the link to the MTA's data portal. There's other data on New York State's open source data in relation to bus ridership, and the MTA is pretty good about putting that out as well. I know we talked about inflation and bonds and the impacts. I mean, I can only speculate there. Obviously, prices increase, prices are going to increase. Typically, there is some escalation that's added into the budget. I'm sure that there are going to have to be adjustments made going forward. In terms of projects that are funded through congestion pricing, there is I can just put into the map into the chat right now. There is a map that's showing all the projects that are to be supported by congestion pricing, what is actually happening now as the money starts coming in. I don't know how they are going to be announcing them or if they are going to be directly relating them to specific projects, but there is a very clearly defined inventory of projects that are going to be done using congestion pricing funds. And you may have heard in the news that when they announced that congestion pricing was starting, that they were able to essentially restart some of the projects that were temporarily canceled when we thought it was going to be when congestion pricing was originally
Was?
paused by the governor back last June, I believe it was, or May, whenever. Trying to think what else we talked about. Yeah, I really am not an expert in terms of the MTA's audit practices or finance practices, so I don't think I'm qualified to really talk about that. Um, Anything else that I missed? I started taking notes when I realized that there were more than a few questions.
Yeah, I don't have any others, but John, could you post the things that were put on the chat on the congestion pricing web page, please? So that members of the public who couldn't pull it off the chat have access to it, and anyone else who wasn't at the meeting or sees it on YouTube. Thank you. Craig, I don't expect you to have the answers. I don't even know if anyone at the MTA would have the answers right now, but we should keep all of these open questions in mind for the next meeting and to keep track of. And all the data should just be month over month, not to the extent possible, not year over year, which I don't think they're doing. The more information, and I know you've said you think they're transparent, I would disagree on that, but the more information that we have, the better. I know we've asked for metrics to be looked at and reported on more frequently and more extensively in our district than the MTA had originally indicated it would. I don't know if they've responded to that or if they're going to do that, but we should certainly keep track of that and reissue the resolution asking for that if necessary, because the more data we have, the better.
I can't disagree with that.
On that note, unless there's anyone else, is there a motion to adjourn? That'd just be up to you, Sharon, or Craig, or me.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, is there a second? I'm going to assume Sharon seconds it or I second it. So let's just say
Fine.
there's no old business, new business. Let's say thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Craig and John. Thank you
Thank you,
for so
Alita.
much that you
Thank you,
do
John.
during this. And goodbye, everyone. See you next time. Thank you. Oh, and if you have questions, you should just write to us, care of the board office. Thank you, everyone.